wonderful Mujeres. I'm joined by some very wonderful women in this room. And our special guest today is Dr. Celina Osuna. She's a professor at UTEP. She currently has a book out right now. And she's joined us today to kind of give us insight into more of the environmental side and the women's side of what it's like being a woman writing out in the world. Alrighty, if you don't mind, I'll start us off. So have the recent increase in data centers, especially the new and upcoming potential projects that we have going on here in El Paso, put a strain against your work and how you speak about it, especially when it comes to environmentalism, and I know you do a lot of speakings.
Yeah, thank you. It's nice to be here with y'all. Thanks for the invitation to join in this conversation and hitting the ground running. Absolutely, I think that one of the things about environmental work, whether it's humanities or otherwise, is that you're tied to the lived experiences or the lived realities of different places, different communities. And so, of course, in our area with the data centers that are being proposed to be built within the next couple years and are proposed to be taking millions of gallons of water from the area and impact, everything from electric and gas bills already have been impacted due to some of the discussions, the negotiations that are happening with these companies, Project Jupiter and Meta being the kind of the two most well-known in the area. The way that this works in my research and my field is that we are kind of trying to always catch up. So historically, in environmental humanities, we might talk about climate injustice or environmental justice/injustice, and you're looking at things like water rights, and you're looking at things like pollution, contamination, disposal of nuclear waste in New Mexico, for example. And we look at these issues and we talk about them in terms of extraction, exploitation. Tracy Bryn Boyles' wastelanding. John Beck has a lot of discussions about landscape as a weapon and the militarization of the American West, and specifically the Desert Southwest. And so we've had time as a field to discuss these aspects of it. So wastelanding, for example, is a foray into Navajo Nation, the Dene people, and how they were exploited for their labor in mining for uranium in the wake of the Manhattan Project in the 1950s. And then kind of looking at how that impact what we call the downwinders, or the people who are affected by the open mines or the exposure to uranium, how all of that has rolled out over time. The data centers are very new, and so we don't have tons of the same kind of engagement or discussions around them because they're fairly new to our area. There are places where we know they have impacted the local residents, things like water pressure, I already mentioned bills, things like that. But we don't know the specifics yet. And so in order to be able to write about them, we kind of have to have some know-how, but it does seem like the latest wave. I do teach about oil quite a lot. For anybody who's had my literature and film course, we talk about oil for the first half of the semester. And so you look at the history of oil and drilling and how the railroads line up with all of that and how the technologies shift over time, but how the labor stream is still there and still expected and still exploited. And so data centers for me are like, okay, the latest technology that we're having to grapple with in the field and also in our everyday lives. So that's kind of, I feel like it's very new. And so we are trying to engage with this aspect in the work, but I don't know if y'all have read any books recently that mention data centers, right? Like it's kind of just too new. I'm sure there will be many. But so far, I'm not aware of any. I would love, if anybody out there has suggestions, I would love to start to take that on in the work. I think it's a natural progression of the ways that extractive technologies are operating. But so far, it's just so new that it hasn't put any pressure on my work, outside pressure on my work, except to find the things to engage with.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, and then I feel like that has a lot to do with AI being so new and constantly growing. And especially, I believe all of us here are creative writers or creative writing majors. So we're all constantly dealing with the effects of AI and that worry of what's going to happen, how does this affect our field, and how is this going to affect our writing or like what we're able to do in the future. And then especially as women, that feels like more of a threat because that really does impact our voices and what we're able to say, do, have opinions on as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so leading into our next question, how do projects like data centers affect the relationship Indigenous and Chicanx communities have with the land and water, and especially when those resources are tied to cultural identity and history?
Yeah, another big question. I think that, I mean, in line with my previous answer, I think that we know that data centers need certain conditions to exist. So they don't necessarily, mostly my work deals with desert places, but data centers are not just in desert places. They're kind of all over the place, but they are usually on the outskirts of towns and places where the populations are of certain demographics, usually like Black communities, Indigenous communities, Chicanx communities, Latinx communities. And so we've seen that impact, and even like just lower income communities sometimes too, like regardless of race, ethnicity, gender, etc. So we've seen that as a trend, so to speak. And yeah, that's, I mean, I think tie that in with my previous answer. I feel like historically environmental injustices have disproportionately affected people of color, Indigenous peoples, like no matter what project of extraction or exploitation you're looking at almost any country, any continent, you can find that that's the case.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much. That answers all my questions. I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic over to Carissa.
Would love to hear about like the gendered aspects of this. I feel like it's not an area, environmentalism and like how to be active, you know, the gendered elements of a lot of topics are coming up and we're talking about them, but this is an area that I feel like I'm not hearing about. And I think what specifically comes to mind is like, you're in these spaces, right, that you've been describing, and like wanting to move into work on the data centers discussions. What do you find that maybe you're bringing to the table, perspective, heart, pros, cons, that are differing from your male counterparts? Like where do you sense kind of that your perspective is a little different? And that good or bad, right? Like what are your male counterparts bringing to the table that maybe that are opening your eyes to other elements too?
Another big question. Yeah, this one is difficult because I feel like my identity is intersectional, and so as a woman of color in any academic institution, you're already in a system which historically has not favored you,
right,
and has historically not presented you with the same kinds of opportunities as other people. I think that I have been very fortunate in my trajectory. I mean, going back to I don't even know when, I've been very fortunate that I've found many mentors along the way of various genders who have uplifted my work, encouraged me to keep going. I will say that there are times, not as many lately, that's for sure, but especially when I was doing the PhD work and kind of in a, you're under a lot of duress, right? There's a lot of pressure to kind of get this work done. And at the time too, you're like juggling just your day-to-day life. And so you're like, how do I juggle my day-to-day life and also try to attain these standards that I am just learning what these standards even are. So there were plenty of times where I felt like I wasn't sure because there were none of the people in the room represented where I come from or who I am, that I wasn't sure if I should stay in the room or leave the room, right? Because if I leave the room, then I can alleviate myself from that pressure. But if I stay in the room, you continue to feel like, do I have to always bring my whole self with me? I think that something that I learned from seeing it modeled, usually from men in the various institutions where I've been, they tend to have a much clearer sense of boundaries between the personal and the professional. And I feel like that was something that was good for me to see and understand that I could do that too, because
Yeah.
I do think, at least culturally, how I grew up, I historically have been very accommodating. And so that's accommodating to, now that I'm in a different role as assistant professor here at UTEP, like that sometimes comes with what we call emotional labor, which studies have shown tends to fall on women faculty, instructors, et cetera, because students might feel more comfortable coming to their women mentors, professors, et cetera, and saying, hey, this is what's going on in my life right now, and kind of just elaborating. And I guess traditionally, at least, and especially in this region, we are more programmed somehow to care. And I hate that the notion of care is gendered. There's a really good book called Matters of Care that I would recommend if you're interested in that, and kind of like the feminization of care and how we theorize through that. But regardless, I have found in my own experience that it does seem to be true. And so sometimes, just out of protection for my own time and energy, and nothing personal towards anybody else, you have to figure out how to establish the boundaries between personal and professional. But I think also it's a unique thing to be able to, I don't know, blur that line at times so that you can encourage the students to feel empowered in who they are. Because they're, now I'm looking at students and they're like 15 years younger than me on average. Like, they're a whole lifetime, a whole other generation younger than me. And so we haven't had the same trials and tribulations as each other. Right? Theirs could be more difficult, theirs could be easier. But I've already done the work in the institution to kind of feel at least more adjusted and more as comfortable as one can feel. And so my role sometimes becomes mentor in that way, to help them feel seen and understood as a scholar who's meant to be in the rooms. And it's up to them whether or not, like how long they want to be in those rooms is up to them. But I always want my students to, leave any conversation with me feeling empowered to be able to do the work that they set out to do. And so while I am not a counselor, inevitably, families and friends stories come up or whatever, but I try to steer us and keep us in the realm of the professional so that we can, figure out how best they can achieve whatever their goals are. In terms of the institutions. So I think, I've learned a lot about boundaries from both good and bad examples, I would say from both genders, all the genders. I feel like I've seen, it navigated various ways, and it just becomes important to, I think, model a healthy, balanced behavior. With your students and with your colleagues as best as you can.
I love that visual you're painting of staying in the room or leaving the room. I think that's like what a beautiful and like a room brings that image of tension. Right? Do I stay and press into this tension, or is this a time to leave? Right? That's like, I think, something we all have to face in different spaces. And that both have their place, right? There's a time to walk out. And then there's a time to stay in, right?
And it's something that I guess it's a visual I can conjure now and kind of look back and make it like, cutesy. But that's stemming from some very serious experiences of like, I'm in a very certain particular room. Do I go or do I continue? And so there were definitely, parts of grad school that felt like everything is pushing towards go, stop, leave, leave it alone, go find something else to do. And then I'd talk to friends, I'd talk to family, and somehow find, again, what is the purpose of the work that I'm trying to do? How am I trying to represent my communities? And, can I do right by them, or at least try to? And so that returning to yourself to figure out, why even do the work that I do has been pretty... I don't know. That's been the well that I take from when I can to nourish myself if I feel, I don't know, impressed upon by other forces.
Yeah, that's so good. I think, I was really hearing that in what you're saying too, and I've been processing that lately also. Do you bring your whole integrated self to every space, or are there spaces that only certain parts? And when you were describing working across with different genders and that there's times where, or working with your students that it's like professional first and there's parts that you have to leave.
Mm-hmm.
But I love that you hold that tension and that there's space for, especially with your students, like sometimes that line gets blurry and you're kind of, I hear you like feeling out that line,
Yes.
you know?
Oh,
like,
yeah, definitely. I mean, it's like, you know, I'm currently at the end of my third year here at UTEP, and so I've had 3 years,
Yeah.
you know, 6 semesters to continue to navigate that and figure out, and it's trial and error sometimes, but also things as simple as, I was talking to a student yesterday, actually, about it would feel remiss to me, especially with the focus of my work and the expertise of my work, which, by the way, when you're in the classroom teaching, it's not like I'm teaching about deserts all the time in all the classes, right? So occasionally I might get extra excited because we're in a realm of what I really do. But I would feel remiss to not share with my students that I was once literally in the same seats that they were. It seems like a very important part of my story that I'm from El Paso, grew up here, went to UTEP, was literally in the same rooms that they're in classes with me. So far, at least. They've all been in rooms that I took English classes in. Which is wild at first. It's a little wild because you feel like you should, you know, give somebody else the chance to present. Something.
Perspective shift. Wait, I'm sitting here?
But I feel like it's important, not because, what I was saying to the student yesterday too is like, I don't think it's important because everybody in my class wants to be an English professor and they see me and they're like, yeah, that's what I want to do. But I think the bigger message is that you can achieve what you set out to do, right? Like it is possible if you set these goals and you set yourself on a trajectory, you can attain that, right? That's the more important message. I mean, hey, all of y'all who want to be, you know, English professors, go for it. And you know, and I'm very grateful for my position every day. But I think that part of the story of my personal life that it just would be weird to not share that, I think. Like for me, because the nature of the work and my approach is so rooted in place and place-based ideas and connections. And so I feel like that's an opportunity to let them know, hey, we're all human, right? I think sometimes I get students that are so trained to be down on themselves or to apologize a lot or to feel like, I don't know, they're not good enough or El Paso Juarez is not good enough. And so a lot of what I try to encourage is like, you're in my classroom, you are scholars, but you're also like humans that have roles, maybe you have pets, maybe you have kids, parents, grandparents, other family or friends that you tend to, jobs. And so it's a way to kind of say like, I don't know, here we are, we find ourselves here together now, and I can share at least some of the experience that you're having.
We were talking about like spaces and being back, kind of this full circle moment, which is making me think of our conversation before we started about how you've gone to these different places and it's shown you things about the desert, what being in different spaces has shown you about this space that we're in. As you're talking about, I mean, that's so cool. Like that, your story starting in the desks at UTEP and then now that's what you're looking at. Even like,
I mean, so I did my undergrad here. I left a few weeks later. I went to go live in Scotland. And it took me about a year before I found myself back in the classroom over there. So I did join a master's degree that just so happened to be called Literature, Culture, and Place.
Wow.
And at the time, I did not know what that meant.
Yeah.
Like I knew what culture was, I knew what literature was, but I didn't really understand place as in terms of like, we're going to study place and what place means as a concept. And as luck would have it, one of the classes was desert-based.
Wow.
And so I read
in
about
Scotland.
In Scotland.
That's wild.
Yeah,
wow.
There was a professor, Rooney Growlund, who, again, he's still preaching the good word of, you know, desert places as important. But I took his course and I wrote this in the book and in the introduction, it's in there, but it's as true as ever where I remember sitting there in class. It was a very small class. It was about as many of us as are here. Like, it was a very tiny program.
Wow.
And I remember sitting there, and he handed out the syllabus, and he went around the room and said, like, what do you expect from this class? And I was so excited and excitable and enthusiastic, probably obnoxiously so. And I remember being like, everything. Like I literally just told him, I was like, everything. I didn't even realize till I was looking at the syllabus in front of me that you could study deserts in this way.
Yeah.
I remember reading these books that were on the syllabus, and they were set kind of around the world, like different books from different deserts around the world. And I remember reading them and feeling like they were such a window to being back home, and like feeling that feeling of like when you get into the car during the summer and it's like been really like oven baked.
Yes.
And like feel like I would daydream about that feeling.
Wow.
Now, of course, now I've lived in Arizona for
Yeah.
8 years, and now, you know, that's
You got your fill.
I definitely got my fill. But I definitely felt like, wow, this is so interesting. I want to know more. And by the time I was submitting my letter for the PhD program, which, by the way, I knew nothing about what I was doing, like nothing. I had, by that point, I had been out of the master's program for a year or two or something, and I just remember literally writing it from the heart.
Yeah.
Like I remember being like, I'm just tired. I read all those books. That class opened my mind a whole lot, but also those books were still largely written by men, and by men who were out in the world exploring these desert places as like exotic, and the people that lived there as exotic. And so I really felt like, you know what? I don't see my own connection, my own relationship with deserts in this way. Like, yeah, sure, some of them were talking about the beauty of deserts and like how you can lose yourself in them, but I was missing like the actual community representation aspect of it. And so that was the best I could do for the letter, was talking about like trying to get rid of like the Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner desert in people's mind, and trying to figure out what else instead. But it took the whole program to kind of figure out how to articulate that and what I wanted to do with it. And so, yeah, that's kind of that trajectory of I keep saying trajectory, but it all is, you know, life is many trajectories. But I feel like being in Scotland allowed me to appreciate the things I didn't. I remember coming back and visiting family here, and we were at some restaurant on Mesa. We were at some restaurant, and they started to put the blinds. Like they started to put the shutters, and it was daytime. Yeah. They started putting the shutters, and I was like, no, there's so much sunlight. Like there's, no, we gotta have every, like I went and opened them back up, and I was like, it's so precious.
Yeah. It is a precious resource.
It's a precious resource. I do remember being like, oh, wow, light, you know, because also out there, the winters you get, if the sun makes it through the clouds, which is not a guarantee, you get like sunlight in the winter from maybe like 9:30 in the morning to maybe 3 p.m. Like maybe it's a very small window for that. On the contrary, in the summer you get very long days where the sunlight is out until like 9:30, 10 o'clock, which is pretty cool. Right. But that winter makes you kind of pay for it. So I think seeing how desert communities were represented in those books really lit a fire in me that has not gone out, about trying to at least for the places that I know, like so being here, being in the Sonoran Desert, to kind of shine a light on the realities of those histories and the current situations and things like that, and then trying to encourage other people to, you know, take up work in the deserts that they maybe come from, or if you're not from deserts, then cool. But maybe doing more careful work that doesn't, I don't know, mythologize or, like I say, like exoticize or extract. Right? Like that's interested in relationship building. Because I have to say that too, because even though I'm really big on representation and wanting more experts from desert places to be heard, listened to, embraced. It's not to say that if you're from somewhere else, you can't write on it, but just writing on it with like intention and care is, I think, the move that I would encourage.
I love how you're highlighting that. Like that's an exoticize. That's such a good like lens to put on things.
It's rampant.
It is. Yeah.
I really, when I give talks, you know, sometimes I put up these slides of different films. And I've taken stills from different films, and so everything from Lawrence of Arabia to the Man with No Name trilogy to like Oppenheimer, the Barbie movie even is in there. Yeah, she's like standing tall in a desert place. But so this idea and this color palette of deserts is like orange and blue, horizon,
Yeah.
single solitary figure.
Yeah.
Like there's so much more than that.
Right,
There's something, there is something cool and obviously prevalent about that aesthetic, but that's not what I'm trying to get at, I guess, with my work.
Yeah.
Like that
Yeah.
idea of desert is very well established.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
also I will say is part of what I like to attribute as the desert, like capital D. So one of the things that I did in the course of the book and in the course of my thinking was I tried to eradicate this idea of the desert
Yeah.
unless I was talking about that, like
Right.
the wastelandy, barren, open
Yeah.
desert.
Okay.
So instead I will say like desert places, desert environments, desert community, deserts, plural, or I'll name the specific desert. So
Yeah.
we're in the Chihuahuan Desert right now. I was
Right.
in the Sonoran Desert last week. Like
Yeah.
that way we build a sort of intimacy, because if you keep it as the desert,
Wow.
it just remains that like open,
Yes.
let's just have Hollywood throw whatever they want in there.
Right.
Let's, have militarization
Yeah.
projects or data centers just do whatever they want in there.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I love that idea of intimacy, and then that image you
Yes.
created, like Barbie or whatever other stuff too. Like you're saying, with the
there's so many.
empty land,
Rango.
so many, yeah.
There's so many.
That empty landscape and a solitary figure,
Yeah.
like that is not intimate, right?
Right,
And
no.
it's nondescript.
Yeah.
That could be, you watch those movies and you're like, well, that could have been on the outskirts of El Paso. It could have been in
Yeah.
New Mexico, like, and you're like trying to place it. But it's nondescript, and it's alone. And it's this
Yeah.
idea of the desert as like you go and you're alone and nobody's out there.
Yeah.
And then we're like, we're out here. Hello, And so I love that idea of creating intimacy by naming.
Sure.
Yeah. That's so
and
beautiful.
it's a feat to like in those films typically, it's a feat to like cross
Yes.
through it and make it alive.
Yes.
Make it out alive.
Yes. So
But
true.
there's lots of people who live in desert
Right.
places, so we're
Right.
not like necessarily trying to get anywhere except like, I don't know, get groceries, hang out,
Right.
go to work. Like,
Not through it, we're in it,
I
yeah.
think like that intensity,
Yeah.
desert intensities do lend themselves to those depictions, right? Like there are certain parts of the Mojave, like Death Valley.
Right.
There's like certain parts of desert places that can get really intense, and they may not have built environments or amenities
Right.
or whatever, but I mean overall,
Yeah.
they're pretty livable places.
Yeah.
Okay, hello.
Hi.
I'm Crisel. Huge fan of you, and just wanted to put that.
Same.
Oh, thank you. But okay, so leaning more towards the creative side, we would love to hear more about your artistic side. And my first question is, how do you use music and art as a form of activism?
Yeah, I mean, this, is not necessarily the hottest take, but I feel like music and art is kind of always activist in nature, because in order to do music, art, or any other artistic endeavor, I feel like you are having to carve out time to do those things, and you're having conversations with yourself, usually, maybe other people that influence that process, that I feel are, whether they're fantastical or rooted in reality, I feel like that process, that creative process, is something that works against forces like capitalism, systemic oppression, etc. Like name some pretty heady forces, but to find the times to get to do that, and especially to get to do those things and share it with people in your community, I think is already a form of activism in and of itself. And then on top of that, if then you get like different thematics, right? So I have friends that will you look at their pieces, and in no uncertain terms, where they're standing about, I don't know, particular groups of people, or particular, usually to uplift particular groups of people, but sometimes also to critique different systemic oppressions. And so I think that there's layers to that. I think that if you stop making music, or you stop making art, or you stop, I don't know, crocheting, or whatever you're doing, if you stop those things, then those heavy forces have won. And essentially, I don't know about, everyone listening, but most of us have to go to a job, right? To get paid, to pay bills and maybe rent or mortgage, or we have to buy food to feed ourselves. And so whether you love it or hate it, money is what's making things tick right now. And so being able to carve that time out and do something that is not necessarily rooted in capital can be really profound, and it can be what gives you hope and joy and wonder in times of darkness or heaviness. And so just getting to be able to do the things, I think, is a first step. And then, depending on your flavor of those things, you can be, a Bob Dylan and write, or a Neil Young and write about different uprisings or violences, or you can, I don't know, write about something that's like more, like, what is the word? Like flowery or silly, or I don't know, heartbreak, like something more simple, right? And so I think there's different layers to it, but I think the important thing is, so many people that I meet, including students, will tell me that they're not creative, because I give them an opportunity with the classes. I give them an opportunity typically to do like a traditional essay or to do a creative project. And the reason that I do that is so that it can feed some of that maybe creative curiosity that they may not feel able or empowered to do if they were having to just do an essay. And there are plenty of people who still choose to do the essay, but it's their choice to take that on. And I feel like all writing is creative. I know y'all said that you're creative writers. All writing is creative. It's just, to different extents, right? And like, what kind of worlds are you building? What kind of genre are you writing? Things like that. But when they elect to go the creative route, I see a lot of uncertainty because, I'm not a professional, or I'm not really sure. But sometimes the best result is when they just throw themselves in there and just kind of do it. And it doesn't have to be, the whole point isn't to be professional. The whole point is to engage with that side of yourself and to do something that, I don't know, might illuminate parts of yourself that you didn't know you had. And other ways of saying things about texts or interpreting ideas, right? Like, how do you read a book or watch a film, and what do you take away from that? And how else can you express that might not be through words? I think I find that in my art. Like, I do printmaking. I haven't made a print in several months maybe, but typically my realm of art is printmaking, and then I also play music. And I find when I'm writing a song, or even just the chords to the song, there's something freeing about it not being tied to language necessarily. And there's something really nice about being in a space and embodying it. I feel like there's something really amazing about getting to embody things when normally my job centers around thinking about them and expressing them in words and writing them down in words. So that allows me to think about things on a different register. I think a lot of the times when I was writing the book, there were plenty of moments that I decided, okay, I need to move from the office that I was, the makeshift office at home, and go to the makeshift music room and just pick up the guitar and just start, I don't know, playing something, like whether it was a cover, whether it was a song I was writing, and it would allow the kind of stress from the writing to alleviate. And I don't know, I mean, on an individual level, that felt very activist, because it's like, well, I'm figuring out the ways that I need to be and exist so that I can complete the degree and so I can get to the next rung of the ladder. But generally, it's also just really nice to feel like a whole human and not feel like you have only one way to express yourself. And so same thing with the printmaking. A lot of the prints I was doing are place-based, so I have like a print of, a vulture, and I remember reading all these vulture facts and getting really excited about, I love them, getting really excited about what they mean to our desert ecologies. And same thing, I looked up, the lesser long-nosed bat is a pollinator of the saguaro cactus. The saguaro cactus is native to the Sonoran Desert, and seeing how it pollinates these giant cacti, and I don't know, gets all full of fuzzy pollen, and just things that enable me then to have an understanding of the place so that I can then go forward and educate when it's appropriate, I guess. Learn from people even more when that's appropriate. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned like that everyone has a creative side, because
For
I do
sure.
hear a lot from even like friends and family that say, "Oh, I'm not creative, like you're more creative," or "I don't do art or any of that." But I agree. I think everybody has that in them.
Yeah.
And I've noticed that because you also mentioned earlier about confidence in regards to our community.
Yeah.
And I think that goes hand in hand because I'm originally from Dallas, but overall I've noticed that our like Latinx culture overall is not very confident overall when it comes to like several areas. But so I love that you mentioned that, and how everybody should like tap in more into that artistic side, because I don't know if you agree, but has it also helped you like build up your confidence?
Oh, that's a great question. I think that for me, confidence building is a lifelong goal. So we'll see. When I walk into a room with artists, sometimes I feel like, I'm artist like lowercase a, and they're artists like capital A, right? Because it's something that maybe they have studios, maybe they have a daily practice, maybe they've shown work in galleries, or they teach art or something like that, right? But I've tried to, I don't know, give myself the benefit of the doubt, knowing that it's a practice that I've cultivated since I was a kid. Like not the printmaking, I found that, I don't know when. I think I was living in Scotland when I was first making prints, and it's been very sporadic. But you couldn't keep me away from like crayons and markers and paints, and also even MS Paint, like the old school program. I remember being on that and sitting with that for hours, and so I've always had that desire to do it. And I think that sometimes, because I have music and because I have printmaking and because I have research, I feel like I tell people often that I can really only have 2 of those going at once at a level that I am proud of, like that is consistent. So right now through the semester, I play music fairly regularly. I pick up the guitar a couple times a week. Sometimes I play with people once a week, and that feels good and consistent because I'm not losing any progress. But the last time that I consistently made prints was probably a year ago, so it feels like further away. But I try to give myself the benefit of the doubt that I have put in hours at this point, right? And it's one of those things too with students where you're like, well, if you don't go for it, just not you personally will never, but no one can ever get to level 10 if they don't go through 1 through 9, right?
So true.
And so starting today is better than never starting. Starting next week is better than never starting. So I understand where that's coming from, and I also understand, just from my experiences in our community, that like creative things can seem very like, why? Why they take money sometimes if you're like buying, in printmaking, it costs a lot of money sometimes. You can do some things though at home that, like you can carve potatoes, you can carve like pink erasers, you can make it work. But a lot of times it's kind of like, why? Like you work, you hang out, you tend to, your familial duties or hang out with friends, and then, I don't know, that creative outlet doesn't get fostered always. It's somehow like looked over. And so then people have that narrative of I'm not creative. But it's like, well, how often have you tried outside of things like I used to work at a preschool, outside of things like, hey, setting them down and having them finger paint, or the things that, I don't know, those things that we got to do as kids a lot of times, and we had the space to do it, I think is something that I want us to kind of tap back into as adults, I guess. It's like, how can you find that space to just, you didn't care when you were a kid? Maybe you were a kid who really wanted to color in the lines, but a lot of times, like at the preschool, I'd see, just various colors that made no sense. And there's a real beauty to that because it's unencumbered by what someone else might think about this. It's really coming from like, I just felt like grabbing the blue crayon and doing this. So I think that spirit of play and experimentation has really remained important to me across the board. I think that's the kind of activism that I appreciate a lot, is where it's very rooted in things that are happening and it's very informed, but then it also gives gives a platform to like a local band or a couple bands or a couple local DJs, or, you know, auctioning off local art, like things like that that really embrace the creative outputs that are around us, and celebrate those while also trying to educate about things that are trying to harm us, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Before I forget, you mentioned your band and also your
Yeah.
prints.
Yeah.
Where can our viewers find like your music?
You will not find the band.
Okay.
The band was a very, very long time ago. But the prints, I mean, I guess I have like, you know, a public Instagram, and so I put kind of everything on there. And so depending on the time of year, you'll see either it's more music-based. It started out more art-based, so if you go there, you can see at least the beginning of that profile was all for the printmaking. And then I decided to, you know, speaking to an earlier question of like, do you bring your whole self? I decided, well, you know what, I am all these things, and so they should all live in the same space. So you can see the any music stuff that's coming out, it will be there. We're working on it. I have performed a couple times since being back in El Paso, and I've been very grateful to do that. But also, like I said, it's been hard to be proactive because of all the research. Like really being at the finish line of finishing up the book last semester, and then this semester going and getting to talk about it in different places, hasn't really left a lot of like energy for me to be like hitting up venues and being like, hey, can I play this, you know, this night or that night? But I hope that in the summer I will get back into some printmaking and some music practices at a level that, you know, while the research tampers down, I can kind of, I don't know, get into. But yeah, I'd say the Instagram.
What's your handle?
So it's _ COZY, Cozy, Mandius. So Cozy Mandius, but with an _
Thank you so much for answering all my questions. And now I'm going to lead it off to Eva on your...
Awesome. On my left over here.
Yes.
Okay.
Hello. I know you talked a little bit about your book. What is the title of your book?
So the title is Desert Distortion, and then it has a really long subtitle that I changed, I feel like, a few times, and so now I just kind of, we'd have to look it up, because I feel like it's revealing, it's like revealing abundance in contemporary borderlands ecologies or something like that.
Okay.
I think it's close enough to that.
Sure.
But yeah, Desert Distortion.
Okay, Desert Distortion, cool. How long did it take you to write your book, if you don't mind me asking?
No, I don't mind you asking. Okay. You're going to have to walk with me through the traumatic recalling of doing the book. I mean, so I guess there's a few answers depending on what you decide is the start of the book. And as I've discussed, this is something like a seed was planted, obviously, when I was doing the master's degree, and I realized that you could write about deserts in a scholarly way. And also part of that is just my life experiences, right, leading up to that moment. But technically, I began the PhD in 2015 with the idea in mind. I did not have the distortion bit. I just had the desert bit. And then about 3 years into that program, so maybe around 2018, I was part of a grad student group that was, I don't know, we were ambitious, and we had started planning yearly conferences where we would invite people from everywhere that we could, and we would sometimes present ourselves. And so I had a presentation idea that I told a friend of mine, Emilio. I was like, I don't want to talk about the deserts for this. Like, I want to talk about something else. And I have this idea about, 60s poster art and 60s like psychedelic music, because that's a passion of mine. And I want to talk about it in terms of like, the distortion of the lettering and the distortion of like having a 17-minute long song in a time where 45s, like the singles that would go to the radio station, that was what was in fashion, right? Like 2, 3, maybe over 3 minutes, but something real easy to play. Not like these whole long jams that you would get that sometimes would take over the whole B-side of a record, that were starting to be in fashion. And so I remember doing that presentation and talking to Emilio and him being like, man, you should do distortion. That's it. You should do distortion. And so after doing that presentation, in which I argued that while the counterculture does have some appropriative and harmful tendencies. They also were pushing back against a mainstream media culture that is very like Mad Men, which I don't even know if is a reference that most people know at this point in time. But that like Mad Men advertising of putting things on billboards and on TVs that are like easily digestible, like sans serif fonts, very straightforward messaging. These poster artists in the 60s were doing the opposite. And they were making posters that are very difficult to read. They were using colors that are so vibrant that when you look at them intentionally, your eyes kind of vibrate. Like you can't just look at those and read them. You have to kind of sit and spend time with them. And so that idea really stuck with me as a way to understand also deserts, which require kind of a relationship building with them to understand them better. Like if you look at them like we were talking about earlier, they can be this like generic desert place. But if you start to understand, even down to like the microbes, like if you start to understand the different levels of things that make up a desert ecosystem, even in a built environment, there's a lot of information there. There's a lot of beauty there. There's a lot of opportunity there to relate. And so I started merging this idea of distortion as a technique or a tactic with deserts, which already, funnily enough, already consist sometimes of distortive conditions. So in the book, I write about like a mirage, which both is and isn't real. Like your eyes see it, and so therefore it's real, but the road isn't moving. It's still solid as anything. So both are true. So desert distortion became a way to understand that there are many different kinds of realities and lives and futures possible in desert places. And so I didn't get to that realization until, probably 2018. I defended the dissertation 2020, like literally 4 days after they made us all go virtual. So that was really hard because you work at something for like 5 years and at the end you're like, okay, the finish line is, my family's gonna be in the room and we're all gonna like go get lunch and it's gonna be, and instead it was like me teaching people how to use Zoom. So it was a really weird shift, but I defended in 2020 and felt like, okay, cool, like I'm done with the dissertation and I'll put it on the back burner for a little bit. And then I got the opportunity to have the book contract came through in October. So I defended in March and then the contract came through in October. So then it was like, okay, game on, like it's time to revise. And I always knew, and your mentors will always, if they're good mentors, they will always tell you there will be lots of revisions and a jump from your theorizing at the kind of dissertation level to then the book level. And so that was a really intensive, it came out in 25, so that was a really intensive 5 years of revising. And I didn't realize either how many steps there would be. So there's, everybody, I think, in the fields that literature, cultural studies, et cetera, you all know that when you send your book out, it's going to get reviewed. Like you have a manuscript that you've drafted and you send it out and you get a couple of reviewers that you don't know who they are and they give you their take and then you revise according to that. And then of course, me being me, I just also ended up revising for lots of different reasons. I felt like the dissertation lacked a critical investigation into kind of native understandings of desert places. And so instead of having none of that, I really tried to inject the book with that and started there with chapter 1 and kind of sunk my teeth in as best as I could to kind of set that as the groundwork and the foundation. That was not in the dissertation. And then also the framework of the way I structured the book was very different from the dissertation. I think in the dissertation they were kind of like, I had chosen what seemed to many to be random text to be in conversation around this desert distortion idea. But I always say it's like it was a shower thought of like, oh, I'll have like prepositions be the chapter titles, and then prepositions will dictate the mode of analysis of desert distortion that's happening. And so a quick example of that is for the chapter I title Above. I look at Sicario, which is not a documentary. I have to always say that. It's not a documentary, but Sicario as a film, and I look at how the cinematography is often, there's a lot of aerial cinematography. that is above the land and above the border. And you get to see how the people who have those technologies in the film also are above the law. And so I was using that mode of above to kind of move the distortion, like the sense of desert distortion in the chapter. So there was a hierarchy that I drew out in terms of like the federal agencies and the cartels, and then the local police, because you get a policeman from each side of the border in that film, and then you have migrants. And when we first meet the migrants in the film, they're all sitting down. They've been taken off these buses, they've been pulled over, and they're all sitting down. And so I feel like there was an intentionality behind the cinematography and the directing that clearly showed there's an aerial aspect. And so I used above for that chapter. But you could read that film a million different ways. You could read it through other prepositions, or you could just analyze it through a different methodology. But that's how the book started to come together, was through this tying factor of, if I use different prepositions, I'm then demonstrating the different amount of perspectives one could have of desert places and the different texts that engage desert places. So that didn't happen until probably 2021 or whatever, and then that's when I kind of revised the whole thing according to that process. So it's a very long answer to your question.
It's okay.
Like I could have just said probably 8 or 9 years, but I think that revising, those different stages were really crucial to me being able to be proud of where the book is as published. Like I really put a lot of thought and intention and care into the different registers that I was having, hopefully, different concepts operate at. So
Sure. Yeah. I think the word intention is just what strikes me about all of that, and the intention that was, I don't know when it was birthed in you, like I guess the love or I don't know, you said you spoke about Scotland a little bit, and obviously you're living a little bit, I don't know, maybe you were living a little bit differently before that kind of revelation happened. And then I guess what I'm curious about is, what did life look like before that for you? And like, how did you begin to kind of shift like, and even everyday things, practical things that you did?
Yeah, sure. I mean, before that feels like I don't know, like a hallucination. Before all of that, I feel like I was just really motivated to get out. I think that, and I mean, all the love in the world to my family. It was nothing like that. I always felt like an outsider, and whether or not that was true is kind of irrelevant if that's how you feel. Does that make sense? So
Sure.
like my family always embraced me, even though I was like, on my weird tangents, or I was always very outspoken as a kid, and very vocal and very sure of myself. I'm sure, again, obnoxiously so. I will say moving definitely humbled me, I think, to, I gained patience, humility. Like I gained a lot from leaving and seeing how good I had it in some respects at home. But also I think when I look back, I have a lot of memories of being a kid and being taught things about our desert place that I don't necessarily know are still taught. I don't know. But I remember I actually found it when I was moving back to El Paso, this book from like 3rd or 4th grade, and it's all the different like desert plants. And so it's like me, like I said, with crayon, like coloring these like ocotillos, or I don't know, there's a kangaroo rat, and there's some game that our teacher had us do that was called Desert Defender. And it's like asking you questions about, you see this, water's dripping, and what would you do? And, you're a kid, so it's all like, tell my mom, tell a neighbor, things like that. But I don't know if that was my particular teacher or if that was in the curriculum. I have no idea. But I have moments like that I know there was some part of me that always knew we're pretty conservative in this area in terms of like the water. That even when I moved to ASU, like Arizona, as an adult, I remember being like, oh, you don't have watering days? Like in El Paso, like, odd or even, like you water accordingly. But out there, it was just like, no, you just water whenever you want to. So I think there was always some sort of conscientious effort, kind of whether it was like something I could act on or not, that was in me about deserts. But at the same time, I felt like I knew that there was a whole big world out there that I wanted to be in conversation with, or like people that were into the same things I was into, and how can I get to be in those spaces. And I think part of that is because my mom's from New York. And so like my dad's from here, and actually I was doing a workshop on like ancestry and stuff, and I forget the name of the program now. It's not one of the ones that gets advertised. It's like some other program I hadn't heard of. And I was able to look at our family tree, and like I have lots of generations of folks through my dad's line that are like Chihuahua, and like specifically Chihuahua in the Chihuahuan Desert for a long time. But my mom is from New York, and our family in the late 1800s came over from Italy on that side. And so I think like having that, I just feel like it opened up so much in me that like we would go to New York and I would see, I don't know, so many different cultures and so many different ways of experiencing the world, that it really, I just always had like, I need to go out. That's why I moved literally 2 weeks after I graduated UTEP. I was just gone, right? My poor mom. I'm sorry, Mom. But like I was just gone. Like I couldn't wait to be gone. But then, like I said, when I started having different experiences, it really sheds light on, oh, you know what? Weather matters. But also like cultural things. I felt very at home. Like in Glasgow, there were a lot of ways in which I feel like culturally I was embraced, and that was great. But I think like moving back to the States and moving to Arizona, I thought that it was going to be so much more similar, especially having gone so far away. I was like, I'm going back to the Southwest, like I know what that's about. But I mean, it's a very different culture out there. It's a very, very different culture out there. And sometimes like I felt like, wow, this is so cool, I'm glad I'm learning this. And other times I'd be like, man, we don't do that this way in El Paso. Like, like it was trying to find that balance. But that's kind of before all the writing and everything. I think I just was always curious about places. And then I started to build a vocabulary through my studies of how to talk about these different places and try to put my like feelings to words. So that's what's kind of steered me, I think, on the paths that I've been on, is like figuring out that some of those things that have always been in me, even since I was a kid, now I can like figure out how to do research on them, or figure out who I want to talk to, who can I reach out to and learn more about, I don't know, X, Y, or Z. Yeah.
That's such an interesting, I like that you mentioned that, like since you're a kid, you've always had this thing in you. I remember.
Again, sorry, Mom.
No, I remember. For me, I was. My stepfather told me once. He's like, every time I looked at, I have two younger sisters. So like they're always playing with Barbie dolls. You always had a pen in your hand.
Oh yeah.
And it's like, I think sometimes these things are just in you, and it just takes. I think it takes bravery though, to kind of go against the grain. And I mean, for all of us, we're all writers, we're all creators, to do that thing that is in you, and not, like you said earlier, like just do what's going to pay the bills just because you can have all the money, all the things. And I think that bravery is like super evident in your work and everything that you've produced.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think if I stay with that too long, I'll like, I don't know, like Wile E. Coyote, like he looks down and then he falls, I think it's one of those things. I guess I will try to take the flowers. I'm really bad at that. So thank you. But also, you start to realize, like, there's a line in the book. When I first did a book reading, it was here at UTEP in the Centennial Museum, so by the Chihuahua Desert Gardens. It was hosted by them in the English department. And there's a line in the book. In the conclusion of the book, I wrote it very much just like a journal. Like I wrote it like I'm sitting in my office, I'm writing this conclusion, I'm resituating into El Paso, I'm seeing all these different things. I bring up all these different things about El Paso, and then I kind of get to this part where I say, I'm going to paraphrase myself, but there's a line in there where it says, like, I didn't know that my work would bring me back here. And I say something to the effect of, I only knew I wanted to write the book I wish I had to guide me. And when I read that, and the people that were there can attest, when I read that, even though it was something I had written And like I knew I was gonna read, I planned to read it, I bawled. I literally lost it. I had to like recoup, I had to like bring it back in because I realized in that moment how full circle everything was.
Yeah.
And I think part of it is, if I think about things in that way too often, it makes them so big that it's intimidating and scary. And so sometimes there's just something to putting one foot in front of the other, day at a time, all of that. Those are cliches for a reason. But that's the way that I kind of was thinking about getting from one place. And then before you know it, I think if you're intentional and you're curious and I like to try and be as generous as I can. You will find that doing the work becomes so rewarding for so many ways that you may not have foreseen. And so if I think about it in terms of like, oh, I'm being so brave, like, I don't know, I feel like I would be like, yeah, I'm okay, I gotta, I don't know, do something else or make myself smaller. But thinking about it in terms of like, there was a gap in the literature that I was reading. And I don't just mean literature like novels. I mean, there was a gap in like the scholarship. And I started to realize that because I wasn't recognizing myself in so much of the scholarship. And I just was, and this is like particular, I guess I should do my due diligence. So it's not that there's a shortage in terms of like, I identify, as like Chicana, right? And like Latina. So there is not a shortage of scholars that take on that identity, what that identity of being in the borderlands means, what the identity of Chicana or Latina means, and how there's different kinds of those versions. But there's not a lot of people that were doing work on how that identity is rooted in place in terms of desert places, if that makes sense. Okay. So I was looking for that when I was in the environmental humanities field more proper. A lot of that is kind of like, I don't know, mainstream kind of, there's Latinx environmentalisms. There's a book called Latinx Environmentalisms in which they critique that a lot of environmentalism has historically been like mainstream white kind of, conservationists and people who want to go hiking and participate in recreation and things like that. But there wasn't a lot of discussion at the time that I started writing the book. There was not a lot of discussion about, like Latinx peoples in desert places and that connection to place, putting them together, I guess. There were some desert scholars, there were some Latinx scholars, and I was just like, how can I bridge this to be something that I feel is at least more accurate or something? I know people shy away from authentic, so I won't talk about authentic too much, but just something that resonated more with me. And so that's how I began like trying to formulate that I wanted to produce work that my communities would at least see themselves in. And then one of the best parts that I didn't even think about because I was so busy like trying to finish the book for so long was that I realized I had in my head that, there's going to be so many critics or I don't know, you feel like your work is maybe going to get picked apart. And the reality is I think most people's stuff just kind of sits there, until like somebody finds an interest. But I have already, the book came out in September and I've already been, in Zoom meetings now with different PhD students from different programs. And like the majority of them are from here, but they're somewhere else now. And so it's really cool to like be able to like talk to them about what their projects are, what their interests are, and where they're going to take their work. And if I can be of service and kind of, if the book or myself can be of service, then I'm happy to do that because I know that my options at the time I was doing things felt very limited or closed off. Part of that could be my own world, and maybe there were like blinders on or something at some point. Maybe they did exist and I just didn't get to connect with them. But I really like making myself available to people to kind of just encourage them to go do their version of whatever it is. And so I think I can very proudly say that from the time the book started to end, that there is so much more scholarship now that is talking about deserts in critical ways, and that is bringing in identities and colonial histories and environmental justice and things like that. It's really cool to have seen that over the course of the last few years.
Yeah, that is very cool. And
super cool.
It's exciting too for like people like me who didn't think about it before taking the class, you know.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of people, and I know students who are definitely going to listen to this podcast, that are very interested in AI and are super, they use it every day probably, you know. And so that I think is, I guess, kind of shift gears a little bit in like, what are some things that we can be doing on an everyday basis that make sure that we are being mindful of water, of, our environment, the desert around us.
I mean, a very little practical thing is don't run the water when you're brushing your teeth.
Okay.
That's
Yes.
like very simple thing, very little
Yes.
thing. I mean, the reality is, I think there are lots of things that we can do, like reusable containers. I don't know. Some people bring their own utensils. I mean, there are things like that. At the same time, I had a class at ASU that was environmental literature and criticism, and I remember it was around the time when the straws situation
Oh yeah.
was happening, and like the plastic straws and the turtles and like this narrative of
Yeah.
all of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's true, it is better to not have like millions of plastic things like that. But at the same time, how much of that, I would try to get across the point that the scales at which some of these things are operating, you can only do so much as an individual. I think we should do what we can, and I think the best thing to do is to be educated on, like, I mean, for example, I just saw a report that Elephant Butte is at record low, like record low. And that should be sounding many, many, many alarms. And the Rio Grande being dry up in Albuquerque last year. Like, just things like that should be sounding many alarms amongst us that, like, life cannot continue as it is currently with all the conveniences that we are afforded currently.
Yeah.
And those conversations are probably the most important because those are the ones that are going to impact where you spend your money. And I feel like that is really, at the end of the day, we are in, like I said earlier, we're in a society where money is important. And the scale at which some of these industrial, I mean, the data centers, that scale of water, that has to be fresh water. They can't use ocean water because the salts, I mean, for whatever, there's millions of reasons, but they're taking millions of gallons of water we're not getting those resources back. And it's not just our community. There's lots of communities that have been impacted already. Our community is bracing for impact, I think. But we're already a taxed place in terms of water. We have historically been for some time. And so to think about that in the light of what can you do every day, I'm not sure once they're here what we can do every day other than, I guess, not use them. But that's the nature of those, is it doesn't matter if we locally use them or not. And so I would say that it has to be scaled up. Like, those bigger systems don't change without kind of the masses really understanding that they need to change. And I do tell people as well, because I love speculatively what AI can do and teach us, and, you know, how we could maybe grow together. I'm a little skeptical in terms of things I've read about AI psychosis and things, things to do with short-term memory, things like that. But I am not an anti-tech person, and I'm not a technophobe. But I have a lot of trouble trading my water resources or my community's water resources for that luxury. Because at least in my worldview and in my studies, sustainability is really key. And so when I think sustainability, I think like lifetimes. And the rate at which these centers, for one, I mean, other industries too, but the rate at which some of these things are occurring is really striking. And I don't know that there's enough legibility to the public to understand that, like, no, when the water's gone, the water's gone.
Right. Yeah.
And I don't know, I have my students read a poem from Natalie Diaz called "The First Water is the Body." I think y'all read it in my class.
Yes.
I think at the start of the semester, and then I just read it with my other class at the end of the semester, and so it's fresh. But in "The First Water is the Body," she has a bit that, you know, she says, "My elder says," You can cut off your ear and live. You can cut off your arm and still live. You can cut off your leg and live. But you cut off the water and yeah. And I don't remember, sorry, verbatim, but that's the gist is if you cut off the water, there is no life, right? And so I, myself personally, I have a lot of trouble getting past that just so that you can have, I don't know, summaries of a text or, whatever else. But I do realize that it's here. And I realize that there's I have lots of colleagues that have embraced it and use it in really cool and interesting ways. I just personally, the water thing, growing up in deserts, I guess having desert defender games in 3rd and 4th grade or whatever, it's really like nails on a chalkboard, right? Because I don't know that most people know how much water, like one prompt, they've been saying one prompt is a bottle of water. So, okay, you think about how many questions those, data centers get asked like per day. And you think about like how many bottles of water, and that is very overwhelming to me. And so, okay, great, I can have a reusable water bottle, but it's not really like dealing with that issue, right? So I kind of, I don't know, I think sometimes these things are way more complex and they take a lot more time. They're, sometimes in theory we call it wicked problem, where there's no real one solution or answer that's going to please everybody, and there may not even be one answer, period. Because the reality is now they're in, like those technologies, the AI technologies, they're in everything. They're in everything. They're in like emails, they're in Spotify, they're in everything.
It's like the first thing Google tells you.
Yeah, like whether you opt in or
that's
not, they're just around, right? So, I mean, how do you combat something that's like now just, baked in? And I don't know that there's a clear answer, but I do think if people could start to understand that the further forward we go with things as is, like the current technologies of using all of that water to cool these systems down endlessly, I think people would maybe feel differently, and then maybe act differently according to that, just till we figure some alternative out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If we could run them on solar or something, I don't know. If we could run them on something renewable, something that doesn't take all the fresh water. There's just it blows my mind, because when you think about it, we have searched the galaxy for water, right? Like water is life is, often attributed to many different indigenous nations, but also it's just true. Water is life. And water is the reason, as far as we know, that we all are here and exist to have this conversation. But they've searched the galaxy for water. And we can't find water anywhere else. So to me, just to think about that usage of it, just like it's intentional in terms of, corporate interests, but intentional in terms of like for the communities that it's serving. It's like, what are you being afforded? And what conveniences in the future are you going to give up before it's forced? Because, not to doom and gloom, but there are already cities. I think in South Africa, I feel like I read recently about maybe Mexico City. There's already been cities that like have water shortages and then have turned to like, okay, it's going to be rationed out. You only get so much per day. Things like that that's not like 100 years from now.
Right. Yeah.
It's really not. I would, a decade even just seems like it's here. And so figuring out those ways to be better kin to the land, and that means everything. That means, like I always talk about, like the birds, the bug, the fish, the algae, like everything, to be better kin to understand how better to like steward the land and be in that place, I think is really crucial. But I think that, I don't know, I hope that we figured that out together before it becomes like too dire. But I don't mean to end on gloom and doom, but it gets hard. It does get hard, like in the field that I work in. It gets hard to see like long term becomes less and less of a, like, what does long term even mean? Because at the rate 10 years ago, we couldn't have foreseen that data centers would pop up the way they are.
Mm-hmm.
And we wouldn't have understood the tax on water systems that they're causing, right? And the communities that they're causing. And so you're like, wow, if we didn't see that even like 10 years ago, in another 10 years, what does that look like exponentially? Or have we decided that that's not the way we want to go? And so what do alternatives look like? But I do have a lot of faith I'm grateful to be in the classrooms that I'm in, because I see so much resilience and also like hope and also reality in my students. I see like a lot of like, we didn't ask for this, and so we're gonna do things a bit differently. I have a lot of friends and students who like get really into like legacy, what we call legacy technologies of like, I don't know, playing cassette tapes or DVDs or whatever, like kind of getting off the grid of being plugged in and online, and apps detoxing, things like that. I do see that more often. People are like, yeah, I don't have to share every thought. I don't have to engage online all the time. I can actually be more present in my life. I think that that's really the trick, and I see a lot of hope in that. Even if it is a dire, like, David Goliath situation, I still feel like I see a lot of hope in that. I think there was a time period where we couldn't not be totally glued to the phones, and like now I feel like it's almost, to get to Cristel's question, like there's almost an activism in like, I'm not gonna check my phone for the day, or I'm gonna like not be on that app anymore, or whatever. So that's a form of, I think, turning away from the way things are currently going into figuring out what other modes might be possible. Yeah.
I think that has been the case. I know for myself, like I decided social media was just not good for my brain.
Yeah, sure.
And then I know Cristel too, like we take breaks, and so I do think that that's becoming more, it just happens more often with people that I engage with. I know you're afraid of the doom and gloom, but I think it's very real and it's very important, and especially because we live in in a desert, not the desert.
It's real. It's real. But I guess too, it's like, how can we do work or have conversations that also open up other possible realities? Because I think, yes, it's important to be informed on the current realities and what really exists and what's really impacting you. But also, like, what are some other realities that we could create together? Like, what are some things we could dream up and work on and work towards, collaborate? And what can those look like, and how would those hopefully be more beneficial to, different communities? And I say that, human communities, non-human community, animal communities, ecosystems, etc. How can we give some of that back? So I think both are important. I really can't stress enough that like a lot of my work and a lot of my thinking is how do we hold these complexities so that it's not either or, right? So like there are some real violences, there's some real oppressions, there's a long list of those things that impact us. Even if you're not from El Paso, you're just like living here. We are impacted all the time. Air pollution being one of the, there's so many things that we're impacted by just by being here. But how can we make our realities different, right? How can we make them so that, hey, air quality is better? How can we have conversations so that the people that get elected, or the people that are in activist spaces and like doing some of that work, like what can we bring to the table to like better the whole community as we live here, right? So it's real, it's important to be informed, but I think also we need that creative imaginary. We need like to figure out what other worlds are possible for us, right?
Conversation. I think about that a whole lot. Like,
Good. Great.
Like that no one talks anymore. I go about my day, at work or whatever, and I work with a lot of younger people, and they just are so afraid of saying the wrong thing. And they're just so afraid of being wrong. And I'm like, dude, be wrong. It's okay. And who are you wrong to? You know what I'm saying? And so I think that is such a beautiful thing to like be thinking about. I think that's something that I'm learning is so thick and rich in Native people's communities, Native communities, is like they storytell and they tell about the people before and hopes of what is in the future. And I think that's lost. And so, I hope that we keep talking.
Yeah, I hope we keep talking too. You can't tell me that your families don't sit around and like tell you about their day or some crazy thing that happened. You know, there's always, I feel like storytelling is very, to use the word you used, so like intimate, right? Like I think it's intimate, but it's that comfort level. And I think our comfort level currently is with our screens, right? Because we can text and because we can whatever, even voice memo. But yeah, like what happens like when conversation is the legacy technology? Like how do you get back? And clearly we're doing a podcast. There are so many billions of podcasts out there. Clearly people like conversations, right? They like listening to them, but how do you empower people to engage in them themselves when there's not mics, when there's not headphones, when there's not a studio? Like how do you also foster those communities to flourish? And so I think just, I don't know, in my case, I try to just lead by example. You know, you see somebody and you know they have all these brilliant things in their head and you're like, how can I, you know? So sometimes it's like writing prompts and other times it's like we'll have a conversation. But yes, I think we should always keep talking. Yeah.
Getting to talk about these things that matter, and hopefully the listeners take something away, whether that's like using ChatGPT less or, you know, turning off the water when you brush your teeth. All things are great. And yeah, just thank you very much.
We're just grateful to have you here. Thank you so
Well,
much
thank
for
you.
having us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This has been a really wonderful discussion.
Yeah.
And get to talk about kind of a range of things with y'all is really a treat.
Yeah. Thank you for coming.
And honestly, we could talk to you forever, I feel like. I have so many questions
Well,
left.
anybody that knows me will tell you that I can talk forever. So that's like both a blessing and a curse. But yes, if anyone's out there and, you know, wants to strike up conversations about these things, you can always email me. And yeah, I love getting to do that and connect with people and, I don't know, talk about life.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode with Mindful Mujeres. We are so grateful to Celina Osuna for joining us today to discuss the data centers in El Paso, her experiences around the world, how she uses creativity for activism and joy, and to talk about her book, Desert Distortion. You can find her on Instagram at _cozy, COZY, Mandias, MANDIAS _. Look for her book, Desert Distortion, Revealing the Abundance of Contemporary Borderlands Ecologies by Celina Osuna, at a bookstore near you. Thank you for joining us for this conversation. We hope it inspired you to create something, implement a new water conserving habit, or to think about a desert you know in a new way.